Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is a fellow named Wes Bush. Some of you might know Wes, especially if you're in the startup world, because has literally written the book when it comes to product-led growth. So he wrote a book called Product-Led Growth, where you can check that out. You just search Product-Led Growth book and you will find it. And his company is called ProductLed. So I've known Wes for a couple of years. And while this is a selling podcast, in talking with Wes and reading his book and just knowing him over the years, we felt it would be kind of an interesting topic to bring on to this podcast to talk about when does a product-led growth, a PLG approach make sense? And when does a sales-led approach make sense? And also talking through why it doesn't have to be either or. Maybe there's a little bit of both. And so if you haven't heard of Wes, he's just he's a good friend of mine now. I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years. But he's also a kind of person that always challenges himself. So he has run marathons, he does skydiving, he's built a completely remote business. And right now he's challenging an entire industry on a better way to approach SaaS growth. He likes to say that he's allergic to status quo. So he is the founder and president at ProductLed. He spends most of his time teaching SaaS businesses how to transition from that traditional sales playbook to products that sell themselves. He studied global business and digital arts at the University of Waterloo. He's been a very respected consultant in the space. And I can't say enough about Wes and his knowledge and his expertise when it comes to product-led growth. So initially we talked about making this a bit of a debate, but he's just too damn logical for me to debate with. And we ended up doing a little less arguing and just a lot more discussion about where I feel like sales-led is appropriate, where he feels like product-led is appropriate, and really digging into the weeds of what is important and what is critical for any company that wants to take a product-led growth approach. So some of the key things that he talked about is this paradigm of really understanding how to onboard new customers, engage with them, create value, and get paid. And in the enterprise world, usually we show a little bit of value and then we get paid and then we have to onboard and engage. Whereas on the product-led side, you're doing a lot of the onboarding, the engagement, and creating the value before you get paid. And so there's some real differences in that approach when it comes to how you show value, how you show people why they should be spending money with you. And that's why sometimes it makes sense to do a combination of sales-led with product-led growth. So I won't get into the rest of the details other than you absolutely want to listen to this episode with Wes because of his expertise. And I think it's just a really nice back and forth conversation about when to take a sales-led approach, when to take a PLG approach, and when to do a little bit of both. So that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with Wes. Wes, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to dig into this combo.
Yeah, for sure. We've been talking about this for a couple of months, and with your schedule, my schedule, it's been hard to piece it together. This is a conversation or maybe a debate that I've been wanting to have for a while. So before we get into the topic, I want to give you the floor a little bit. So one of the questions I love to ask people is, hey, Wes, when people ask you, what do you do every day? How do you answer that question?
Yeah. So I am the worst at this. I sometimes, if it's like, I don't want to get into it, I'm like, I'm the consultant. They're like, consultant for what? Okay, I'll tell you the rest of the story. But when it's folks in the B2B space, I'm really the product-led growth guy. If you want to know more about product-led growth, I'm that guy. So yeah, that's the short version.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, we got to know each other. We've known each other for a couple of years now through our mutual work in the industry. And you have literally written the book about product-led growth, which I've got here in front of me. Product-led growth, how to sell or how to build a product that sells itself. And the reason I've been wanting to have you on the show is not just because you've been a good friend and professional colleague, is that the real reason is because this topic of product-led growth has been, I don't know, I want to call it creeping into the enterprise B2B world more and more so over the last couple of years. And because we most often work with early stage, growth stage founders. So these are, typically founders doing less than $1 million in revenue or trying to make a jump from 1 to 3 or 3 to 10 in revenue. And sometimes when I talk to founders and I ask them about their go-to-market strategy, they'll tell me, oh, we're going to take a product-led growth approach to selling to the enterprise. And right there, my heart stops and I freeze and I'm just like, oh, my teeth start to grit. And so my usual response to that is like, no, that's wrong. You can't do PLG to the enterprise. You must do enterprise sales. You must do direct sales.
Oh,
And part of me is like pretty firm on that, but I also know that part of that is probably very wrong. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. So maybe start with like giving people a description, like your definition, like what truly is product-led growth, because that's a word or a phrase that gets passed around a lot and used a lot. So how do you describe or define PLG?
for sure. So I really described it as like whenever you're using your product as the main vehicle to acquire, engage, monetize, and also expand customer value. So like when you look at it from that lens, from the acquisition, that usually looks like, oh yeah, they have the free trial, freemium kind of version of it. From the engagement standpoint, that's like your onboarding, that's getting people to value. It's like, okay, yeah, majority of users can get the value just by using the product. And then the monetization part of that is like, well, actually, I can pay for this product without even talking to anybody. And then the last part, the expansion is like the upsells, everything else that's actually led by the product. It's like, oh, actually, you are a power user and like you might like this other like widget or something like that in the product. It's like, and the product also upsold that customer. So the way I see it, like from the go-to-market standpoint, is like you're just utilizing the product and getting it to work harder for you to really serve the user better.
Okay. And so let's dive into that sort of weird feeling I get down my spine when I have an enterprise B2B founder telling me they're going to take a PLG approach, because my sense is sometimes they do that because they feel like, well, that's the trend. We should do PLG. And sometimes I feel like it's ego, where they feel like, well, the product is just so good, people should be able to see it and understand how it's going to help them. Like, why do I have to sell it to them if they can't figure it out for themselves, and that's their problem? And I think the third reason is part of it is I think might be fear, because something you mentioned there is when people start using the product, they see value in the product, and then they put in the credit card or they start buying the product. And I know a lot of technical founders just are not comfortable doing sales. So that in a way, maybe it's a way to hide behind the product and say like, well, I'm not going to do any selling. We're taking PLG. And maybe it's just not because they believe in PLG. It's just that they're scared. So I'm just curious about how you think about this, or what you've seen as successful or unsuccessful implementations of PLG in the enterprise world.
Yeah, definitely. So I think like at the basic level, whether it's like sales led, product led, or anything, it just comes down to like, who's your customer? Understand them really, really well. So like also, how do they adopt this? What's the best way for them to really kind of like utilize this software? And some software, like let's say a Slack, something like that. It's like, okay, how do you adopt it? Well, maybe it's a team lead or somebody like that. They're like, hey, like I heard about this thing. Let's, start using it, chatting here, better than email, right? And then it starts spreading organically. And it's like, okay, very natural. If Slack had a sales-led go-to-market motion, which they still have a sales team, mind you, but like if that was the only way you could buy it, the adoption piece would be really hard. So like in some products where it's like adoption is key to growth, as far as this product seeing value and like getting integrated within the company, let's make that as easy as possible. It's like a product-led motion is going to thrive in that kind of instance. Some cases where it's like, hey, I was talking to some of the folks at VMware, and they're like, actually, we're selling what many would consider like the heart transplant kind of style of software. Like if this thing goes down, the whole business goes to shit. And like, you don't want to mess with this thing. Like, and they're just like racking their heads around, like, should this be a free trial? And I'm just like, components of it could be. But like, as far as like getting people to understand how it would work and everything else, getting everybody on the same page there, but like actually rolling it out into that organization for free, like that could take them 8 to 12 months on that end too. So you're looking at something very different. It's got to be integrated from kind of like the top down perspective, since there's multiple solutions as part of that. That's really where, like, in my mind, sales thrives, because they're actually creating like this intricate kind of solution that's custom. It has a ton of benefits when it's integrated, and the sales is really kind of leading and developing a lot of that value for them to understand like how to best integrate this. So I think there's like, we could obviously go on different tangents on both ends, but I think like painting this contrast is important.
Yeah, I mean, I like that analogy of the heart. We're selling the heart of, it's the middle of that organization, because if you think
Yeah.
about what the heart does, right? It's all the veins, all the arteries are all channeling in and out. And so enterprise software in that sense is really, it's about the integrations and the applications and where the
Yeah.
data go and all of the compliance checks and regulatory checks and everything else that happens. Like everything feeds into that system. And so it's really hard to just like, we're going to trial something else to
Yeah.
see if this one's better than the one we have, because of the complexity of the integrations. It's sort of like, we'll just like pop this artery off and stick it in another heart for a few minutes and see how it
And
works.
it's
It doesn't
kind of
quite work
like
that way.
if I was a surgeon, a heart surgeon, I was like, hey, Scott, like I have this new free trial and I'm doing heart transplants now. I've changed careers. I was doing theology, but now I fully believe in heart transplants. You'd be like, I'm running away from you, Wes, like a 9 foot, 10 foot pole if I can. And I'm never signing up for that free trial because like, I don't trust it. Something just sounds like iffy about it. So it's like in different circumstances, it just seems like it's different as far as that goes. But in others, it's like, hey, like, do you want to try a piece of gum? Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, and that heart surgeon, like imagine like, well, we can do two things. We can do a bypass, in which case I go in and do some surgery. We do the
Yeah.
bypass procedure, or what we could do is a free trial of this, mechanical heart. So we're going
Yeah.
to take your old heart out. We're going to put the new in, and we'll see how it works for a couple of days. And if it works well, we'll just keep it, and then you can pay me for it after.
Yeah.
Or, if it doesn't work, we'll just go back in and pull it out and put your old heart back in. And you're just like, oh, that feels a
Yeah.
little weird to me. So a second follow-up question I had from what you originally shared, Wes, is use this word adoption.
Yeah.
And that's a word I think could be construed in a lot of different ways. When you think of that term adoption, whether it's through a product-led growth standpoint or a sales-led standpoint, like how do you define adoption, and why is that so critical? What are some of
Yeah.
the obstacles to getting it? What are some paths around those obstacles? Just talk a little bit more about that concept of adoption.
Yes. And I'll take you a roundabout way of answering this one because I think it's so important for people to understand this one piece, whether you define it as like adoption or engagement or anything else. But question. So when you compare like a sales led business versus like a product led business in general, have the fundamentals of business changed? Like with this introduction of like PLG and everything. What's
Mhm.
your take, Scott?
How do I think business has changed?
No, like have the fundamentals of business actually changed?
Oh, of the business we're selling to, or or our business.
Yeah, like the way you do business, like acquire customers, monetize them, has like those fundamentals changed?
I don't know. I mean, so from my perspective, I think if I'm doing any kind of PLG approach, whether it's like officially getting people to log in and set up an
Yeah.
account and use the software or not, it's just like maybe introducing somebody to the product. There tends to be a lot more trust in that experience that somebody's going to have. So I need to trust that whatever engagement they have with the particular product or resource that I'm giving to them, that I need to trust that it's going to work well and they're going to see the value pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
so sometimes there's a challenge in that there's a matching problem there, that the person who is using that product for free, whether it's the actual product or some version of the experience,
Yeah.
they might have in their mind's eye what they need or expectations of what they think the product should do. And if it doesn't match those expectations, or if that person might be the wrong person in the organization, now they're like, this thing doesn't work, or it's not for me. When in fact,
Yeah.
it actually could be good for the organization. So in that
You're
sense,
right. Yeah.
and that's my sense. When it's sales led, my sense is I get to be in more control of that experience, because
Mhm.
I'm going to be doing a lot more discovery, qualification, understanding problems and pains and priorities of that
Yeah.
customer before I do any kind of significant introduction of the product itself in a demo.
Mhm.
And so personally, I've always lived in that world. So I like having that control, because it helps me decide early on if this is real or not. Because if there's no
Yeah.
pain, why bother showing the product? Or there's no interest from higher level executives, why bother doing the demo? So I kind of like it in that sense, because I'm just maybe a bit of a control freak. So that's sort of my perspective based on your question.
No, but I think it's good to kind of like paint out those two differences. And like you're right, like expectations from like users and customers have definitely changed. But like the actual fundamentals, if we were to like boil down business into like three things, it's like you got to acquire people to your site somehow. They got to find out about you. They got to be interested in your offer to sign up for it, even if it's a demo or it's a free trial or something like that. And then there's like the monetization kind of step where it's like, oh yeah, we got to figure out how to like turn this user or sign up into
Hmm.
some form of revenue. And then there's the actual like value or engagement stuff, which is like, okay, how do we actually like deliver on what we promised them? If we're just like say it's like those three things, those haven't changed. But what has
Right. I
changed,
agree.
yeah, what has changed is the order. So, and this is like the
Mm,
one big shift when it comes to like sales led versus product led companies. It's like a sales led company is really focused on like acquire, monetize, and then engage. The only difference with the product led companies, it's like acquire, engage, and then we monetize. So it's like
mm,
it's one small shift, but it actually changes everything because it's like, okay, actually the way we acquire customers is different. The offer is usually a bit different. It's like stuff for free. It's value first in that way. We, as a culture too, we got to like prioritize transparency because now we're showing everything, our whole product, our pricing's public, everything. And then also the monetization step has to be pretty clear. So like that's the one big shift, and like why I kind of went the roundabout way of answering that adoption question is because it's like if you just skip that step, which I made that mistake at Video when we first launched our free trial. And here's what happened. Like we launched a free trial and it looked like we were doing the engagement thing, but it was like sign up for free, 14 days. And you had to do all these steps to upload your video, get analytics on it. And like we put almost zero effort into that engagement step and it didn't work. And so then we're
mm.
left thinking like, oh, this PLG thing sucks. It,
Wait a minute. Hold on. I'm gonna take that as a clip. Wes
yeah.
Bush said PLG sucks. No, I mean, just to quickly clarify. So when you said the engagement, is it that because you had so many steps for the user to do that it felt kind of hard, like it was like a chore for them to actually engage, and therefore they didn't do it? Is that why it failed?
So that's one part. It was actually like a lot of steps. There was actually a lot of other problems there too, which was like we were trying to solve. And this is might be very common for some of your clients too, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm thinking PLG and like we should just slap on a free trial to like our existing product. And we were solving advanced and intermediate problems with that product. The
Mm,
main kind of beginner problems that were unaddressed were like people didn't know how to make the video. So like we were getting them to sign up for the free trial and like, hey, upload your video. And like, we'll give you these cool analytics. And people were like, huh, how do I make a video? So they were like stuck
oh,
way up
interesting.
the curve. And it wasn't until actually the next product was like this, it's this Loom kind of competitor where it's like it's super easy to record a video. It's a Chrome extension. You just plug it in, plug and go. It's awesome. And you can see like within a couple of minutes, like, oh, cool. Somebody watched my video and it's awesome for sales and all that stuff. And so it was like that was the missing piece. And when we did that, we had that freemium model and people were able to engage very quickly.
Mhm.
That's when we saw like 0 to 100,000 users in 12 months. And it was like, ah, cool, this thing works. I was the first time I was like, oh, we missed it. We missed the mark on a lot.
What made you think, like, I'm curious about what you missed there, because I think for anyone that's trying PLG, you
Yeah.
might, again, like as a founder, you built the product or you've got in your mind's eye of what level of sophistication you would expect from the user. But of course, our expectation is going to be way different, especially if it's a new technology that nobody's ever really seen before. So they don't even
Yeah.
have like a mental model that it's, oh, it's like this or it's like that product. Like, how does somebody avoid that kind of blind spot that you had? Like, it sounds like you had to go through a lot of pain to then realize, like, oh, if we just make it easy
Yeah.
for people to record their first video, that bridges that most important gap to get them to engage and have that experience. Like, how can people avoid that? Or is that just what's the process that you would recommend somebody follow so they don't have to go through that pain?
So like literally like our whole kind of like program, what we did, I'll go through the steps. It's like you start with like, who's your user? What is success for them? What are all the challenges they're going to have like along that way? And then we break it down into like three groups of problem sets. There's like beginner problems. Those are like the easy ones people will have for like most of your beginners, for like sales stuff. We might be like, hey, you know what? Like how to do a triage call or like how to do discovery or something like that. It's like, okay, if you're just searching for that stuff, you're probably a beginner. And then it's like intermediate is like, okay, good. Like how to set up an advanced CRM or something like that. And then advanced, it's like how to do like crazy reporting and hiring and training your sales leaders and stuff like that. So it's like we have these boxes of problems. And then it's a matter of like, okay, so what are those beginner problems that are like most prevalent in this specific user's case? What are the underserved ones? What are the ones that like are most important to them? Okay, what are all the ways we could solve them? And a lot of times the beginner problems are, there's a few of them that'll be like, okay, these people really need help. Like in the video arts case, it was like people just don't have video. And then getting analytics and integrating it with like Marketo and all these other marketing automation platforms, it's terrible. So like, let's just send them an email. Okay. We'll send them an email whenever they get like some view on that video, and we're going to make it easy. So we solved two things, two of those beginner problems. We're like, great, that's the free product. We didn't even worry about like, is this a freemium model? Is this a free trial? It was like, no, we solve these beginner problems first. It makes it easy to kind of work around how to actually make this work. So once we identified that, obviously I'm oversimplifying it, but it did make it way easier for us to kind of craft the model around what do people really need to do it. And a lot of sales like companies we find is like they have a bit more like complex products, generally speaking. And so what they can often do is like maybe it's like detaching one piece of the product, and that's actually the beginner problem product or something like that. Or maybe it's a new product to solve those beginner problems.
Hey, thanks for listening. We're off and running in our conversation today with Wes Bush. So one of the things that we talked about is Wes has written a book called Product-Led Growth. Well, I've also written a book. Many of you may have already accessed a copy of that book. Many of you have not. So just want to reintroduce that to you if you haven't grabbed a copy. The title of the book is called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. So one of the reasons you might be interested in this particular episode is that you're looking on how to scale your sales, how to scale your business, and thinking about product-led growth as a potential way of getting a lot of growth quickly, as opposed to sale by sale by sale. Well, look, there are cases as you're listening in this episode to know sometimes sale by sale by sale is the way you have to do it. And sometimes PLG can be the right way. Either way, you as a founder need to stop hustling and doing all of the hard work every day, and you need to start scaling your business. And so that book that I wrote, Stop Hustling, Stop Scaling, is available completely free, just like Wes's book is also available completely free for download. So if you go to salesqualia, sales, QUALIA.com/book, salesqualia.com/book, on that page, you'll see where you can just enter your email address and we will email you a full and complete free PDF version of my book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. So make sure you do that if you haven't already. That will also add you to our email list to let you know all about our upcoming trainings, webinars, and even live events, in-person, real-life events that we're now running that we feel like COVID is somewhat in the rearview mirror. So make sure you grab a copy of the book, get on our email list, and that way we can let you know of all the cool things that we are doing to bring value to you. All right, that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Wes. Yeah, I mean, in the case of Vidyard, like I've used Vidyard in the past, and the thing I loved about it is that it was very easy to integrate. Like It was just like, oh, add this Chrome extension or add it as part of your Gmail. And then there's a number of free videos you can use. And I was using the free stuff. And there was a point where I'm like, oh, I would like to see how many times people have viewed the video, or I'd like to do more videos. And then it was very easy for me to upgrade, and I was already using it. But in that sense, it's more of and I don't know if there's the right terminology, it's more of an add-on, right? It wasn't core to our entire sales process. It wasn't the same as trying to like switch out our CRM, which is kind of like the heart in that analogy. So for a more complex product, so take a VMware kind of product, what would be an example of a basic problem that a more complex enterprise solution might be able to introduce or solve, such that it at least begins that product-led growth approach in a way that could be successful, as opposed to it looking at it like, oh, I'm just going to completely erase or remove the need to sell at all.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, would you agree? Like a CRM tool is kind of like I don't know.
I would say a CRM once you have like a relatively established sales team, like if you have a small team and it's like a founder and a couple of salespeople,
still not core.
You could swap it out pretty quickly because you probably also don't have many other like stacks around it. Like you might use Apollo for outbound, and then Pipedrive for CRM, and then maybe you've got a couple other add-ons. And you're like, okay, we can swap this out, and it's pretty easy. We can get rid of Pipedrive and start using something else. But once you get to like 10 reps and a little bit more sophistication around your sales tech stack, then it becomes a lot more painful. Like I've had to do that at companies where I'm like, we were using, some free CRM, and it was time to buy Salesforce. And I was like, this sucks.
Yeah.
And then when it came time to renew and they told us they were going to double our price, I even said to the rep at the time, I'm like, I'm really pissed you're doubling our price. And they said, yeah, I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. And I said, I could use Zoho for like a fourth of the cost. And they're like, yeah, we know. And I said, but you know why I'm going to renew? because it would be too painful for me to switch from Salesforce to Zoho. I'm like telling the Salesforce rep this. And the rep was like, yeah,
butter
we
me
know,
up and
I know.
kill me.
Yeah, they were just like, yeah, we know. I mean, they were just like, yeah, they were like apologetic about it, but they knew like the lock-in effect was so hard, was so huge, right? So I guess, let's call it a 10 plus sales reps. And certainly when you get to 100 or more, now that CRM is like a major organ, if you will, as part of the way that business functions.
Yeah, totally. So like in that example too, if we use the CRM, it's like, okay, so a lot of times it's like, okay, who are we going to go after? So as a business grows, it's like initially it starts with like the founding team. Okay, so like let's develop the free tool for that founding team. Okay, let's give them everything they need to at least get some traction. So like exactly what HubSpot has done, it's like, okay, your CRM tool is free. Okay, good. You want to build a website, that part's free too. Your forms are free, your live chat's free. It's everything you need to get to like, your first like 1,000 kind of leads before like things start to kind of pick up. You have your sales CRM, and then it's like, oh, okay, you have 3 reps or something, you want to customize a lot more fields or have like, a new product line or something like that. It's like, okay, good. Like you're going to upgrade to the HubSpot sales part of this and start that. So it goes back to that like beginner milestones. It's like, okay, if you're like at this point where it's like, it's only sales led, then it's like, well, what do the businesses look like? What are the problems they're solving before they get here? Like maybe 2 years before, 3 years before, what do those people look like? And you would really, at the end of the day, you have to build like, this is our ideal kind of like user profile of like what that person looks like. It's a different kind of business than like maybe our ideal customer profile, and focusing on those people before and just trying to empower them to eventually get to that point where they're like, oh yeah, these people are the people we want to have in like 2 years, but it might take a year for them to upgrade. And being okay with that is hard because it's a long-term bet.
That's really interesting. Like you mentioned about HubSpot, because like if you think about that founding team, like typically when somebody starts to use HubSpot, what they were switching from are spreadsheets or email. I've worked with founders and like, do you have a CRM? Like, no, I just track everything in email. I'm like, okay, we got to work on that. And many times early stage teams will come to us and they'll say, oh, we're using HubSpot as our CRM. So like, it's like very common for us to see that. And as well as another application, which is Apollo, which is great for outbound. Same thing. They have very, very easy to use free solution. And then there's very obvious when you want to upgrade. And they do a great job. Oftentimes we work with teams. They're like, oh yeah, we're already using Apollo. I'm like, great. Using HubSpot, using Apollo, you got everything you need for now. Right. Whereas very infrequently is it that we're working with an early stage team and they're like, oh, we have Salesforce and we have Outreach or Salesloft. Yeah. Because it's just too hard for them to implement. And really those companies don't tend to focus on those kinds of founders at that stage because it's just too big of a platform. You don't need it. And so what I learned from what you just shared is, number one, you need to be really, really clear about who are you targeting? Like who is that persona that you're going after down to the detail, like what stage of company, what industry, whatever other needs that person has. And then number two, earlier you were talking about like the basic, the medium, and the advanced. That sounds like the only way to know those needs is to go actually do customer development, go talk to people you want to sell to. And I think that's a step as well that gets skipped.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, like the awesome thing about any sales process is you're always doing discovery in a lot of ways. And so you're going to be able to understand like, oh, okay, this product's not a right fit for you right now. Okay. Like what are the challenges you're facing right now? Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. How are you dealing with that? Okay. How satisfied are you? Oh, wow. Okay. You're super unsatisfied with the current way. And like, you can't upload videos. You can't make them. Wow. Okay. Maybe there's something there. Not right now, but like that could be a huge untapped opportunity because it's like, if you start seeing those trends, it's like everybody struggles with this. And even from like content perspective, it's like, oh yeah, we should write about that. Or like, yeah, maybe it's a product thing to get people there faster.
Well, you're on our exhibit A of evidence as to why I would take the approach. Like everything you just described is why I tell our founders that we work with, I'm like, you got to go out and sell. Like maybe later you can figure out a PLG approach. But for now, if you're trying to get your first 10 customers or even your first million or 3 million in revenue, like those conversations, it's one thing to do customer development and ask people like, what are you struggling with or what are you using now? Because there's no pressure there. But if you're actually selling and looking to get the credit card or you're looking to get the invoice sent, whatever that is, it's a totally different dynamic. And until you have those objections, like, oh, I'd love to buy this, but I can't for these reasons. I think what I've always felt like is that when founders try to go PLG from the beginning, they miss out on so much opportunity. And because they typically have such a small sample size of people that are, going to the site, downloading the trial, they just don't have enough data to figure out, okay, where did people drop off? Why didn't they use it? And they're left guessing, and then they burn months and months and months. And then finally they realize like, oh shit, we just have to go out and sell this thing. It's like, yeah, I told you that 8 months ago.
It is
So
interesting though. Like, those three things I mentioned, like acquire, engage, monetize,
yeah,
depending on like how you start your business, it's like you kind of need to develop like the muscle in one of them. And it will actually have a big impact on like how your business kind of develops. It's like, okay, if you're like really great at, let's say, the sales, you're going to like develop that side of the business much faster and solve for like, okay, what do people want to pay for? And then you run into the other problem, like backwards of like, oh, actually we are struggling with like adoption and engagement and people aren't getting to value. And then there's the other side of like, maybe it's the product company, they crack engagement, they get people to value very quickly, but then it's like, oh my goodness, how do we monetize this? So it is kind of like picking your poison, but I think, I don't know. What's your take? Is it engagement
I
harder to
never
get
thought
or
about it that way.
monetization?
Yeah, I mean, that perspective of sales led, like you're selling the promise of the outcome or the
Yeah.
promise of the product. I mean, you're doing demos and probably some POCs or even a paid pilot at some point in that process just to give them a taste and a feel.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you're rolling it out as a big implementation, one of the biggest places of failure is just like you get it working, technically speaking, but nobody at the company is actually using it or adopting it, right? So engagement's really hard. So to your point, right, you sell first, get the money, and then you focus on the engagement problem.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're saying is, because we run into this as well. Like founders like, hey, I've got, 1,000 people using the software right now. And, half of them are Fortune 500s. And we've even talked to some executives, but they haven't figured out the value prop, or they haven't figured out what the pricing strategy should be to extract the value they deserve or the price they deserve to charge for that Fortune 500. So they end up with a Fortune 500 company paying them $1,000 a month when it should be $10,000 a month. So the revenue side, like we're just saying, comes later and it's a different challenge. So I don't know. I guess if it was me, if I'm an early stage company, I would prefer to figure out how to sell and then have the problem of I have money and but I don't have people adopting, because then I can just go force concentration on a couple of those early customers, do everything I can to help them implement. But even there, if you haven't really cracked that, you could end up with some churn. You're like, oh, we got this big contract, but 6 months later, they decided not to renew because while the executives thought it was going to be great, we couldn't get the users to use it. And that just at the end of the day, the executive was like, oops, I guess it's not a good product. So I don't know. But again, I'm biased. I'm just like sell first and then figure out the rest later.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's pros and cons to each way. I think that way you're going to validate, what are people willing to pay for much, much faster. The other way is going to be like, you're going to validate how is this actually delivering value? And I think like, there's like, do you solve that problem first before the value capture of like, okay, we've like got your credit card, you're paying for this. This is awesome. And there's no right or wrong. And it's going to be different for like every kind of business. But yeah, I think like if you deliver value first, you're going to get a lot more, let's say maybe like 10x the amount of people to learn like, oh yeah, you're getting value from this product. And then it's a matter of like, okay, like how valuable is that? You have like a way better sample size to like get the monetization piece unlocked. Yet I have seen companies take forever to do it. And I think the biggest or the hardest piece for a lot of product companies is like, how do you align your pricing with the value of people that they get? Because like that example you gave of the Fortune 500, they should have had like some sort of value metric in place where it's like, if you roll this out to like this many users or something like that, you're going to get charged $10,000 per month. But if you, just have it for one person that's a solopreneur, it's like, it's just this price or it's free or something like that. And making sure that people are getting charged based on the values is a key part of product-led motion.
Yeah. So there's the engagement piece, there's the value piece, but the third piece to me is the budget piece, because if you might have below the line, managers, directors, users every day, like, oh, we love using Vidyard. All of our sales team is using the free version. They're using it all every day. And then you go up above the line to the CRO and say, hey, did you know you have 10 of your 15 sales reps using Vidyard? The enterprise license is $2,000 a month. And the CRO is like, well, that's great. but like we don't have budget for that.
Yeah.
So they were just going to have to keep using the free version. And now you're kind of stuck because now you could have spent 6 months, starting with one rep who was a superstar, and then 2 or 3 others started using it, and they're all seeing results. And now it goes a little viral over the course of a few months. And then you go up to the CRO later to find out, well, they don't have 2 or 3K a month to pay for the enterprise. And again, that's where I fall back to, I'd rather get the no sooner from the executive than later, because if we find this even in your selling to the enterprise, direct selling, you can go how many weeks or months, doing demos and talking to directors and below the line people. And if you don't get access to the true decision maker at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your price is if they don't have budget for it. So again, it is pick your poison, but I don't know. I don't think you've yet convinced me that it's worth going the PLG approach for enterprise.
Yeah, let's say for those reps. So they are working at that company and they don't upgrade, but they love it. They're hooked. As soon as they go, like average sales tenure is pretty low. They go to a different company or something like that.
Right.
They're like, what are they bringing? They're bringing their tools along with them. Like, hey, look at this tool. It's so awesome. That company might upgrade and it might start getting a lot more people. And then those reps start talking about it. So like what you might lose on one deal, you will most likely gain on like that word of mouth and other people who are then like, yeah, this is great. And that's actually how you would unlock that, like, okay, this thing is going on its own, where it's like going from 0 to 100K users very quickly. Whereas like sales kind of led motion it won't have that viral kind of coefficient where it's like, yeah, people aren't like talking about this as much because like actually it's very hard to kind of share it. With that said, I have seen like some great products that use sales led motions like Gong. I hear it all the time, even for product discovery. They're like, I love this product. It's so sticky and all this other stuff. And I'm like, that's awesome. But yeah, it's more of the exception than like, oh yeah, just test this out. It's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, God's a great example, I think, to use in this sort of conversation, because imagine if they had, and I don't know if they have a free trial version where reps could download it and record some of their calls or something, but Gong is relatively expensive. It's a budget line item in a tech stack, right? It's not a $50 a month subscription or $20 a user kind of thing. And so that's the case where you could have a bunch of reps excited for this. And yes, you could have that groundswell of support. But again, if the CRO is like, look, can't do it now, but maybe next year, or put it in next year's budget. I guess I just don't have the stomach for the patience that would be required to go long enough to say, well, there's this viral effect and these reps might move, or the VP of sales leaves that organization and they go to the next one. And my old CRO wouldn't let me buy Gong, but this new one will. So I'm going to go buy it right away, because the startups are living in this, in this world of runway. And I guess the patience required, from what I'm hearing, is pretty great. And sometimes they don't have that approach. So maybe it's a little bit of a dual experiment what you do, like maybe try some PLG on different things, but don't completely rely on it. Meanwhile, make sure you're going out and trying to sell your face off to get those early customers and validation and revenue, so that maybe you can dump that learning into the PLG approach later on and make that even better. Because once you have the users and you figure out where the engagement sticky points are, where the gaps are, where the value is, then you can use that learning, move it into the PLG approach to make that more effective later on.
Yeah. And I think like we've been comparing and contrasting these two approaches, but it's like there is a world where it's like you just blend the best of both. And so it's like a lot of SMBs or like small companies can like sign up for that free version of the product. And then if they're a bigger company, they can like opt for that like demo version if they want. And then there's also the other side of it too, which is called product-led sales, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of people signing up for this product. It's awesome. But then you notice like in that case where it's like, okay, yeah, there's 20 reps. Let's reach out to that CRO. Having that sales motion is really, really effective, because it's like, oh, you already understand the value. We don't have to like communicate any of that. It's like, what's the barrier here? You're losing access to all your videos. Can we help you get more value? And it's like totally different conversation. And that's been a really effective way for a lot of companies who have product motions to still like layer on sales and grow into some of those bigger accounts.
Yeah. Well, and also when I think about what we talked about earlier, if you're doing like pure sales led to the enterprise and you're getting needs and doing discovery and learning about the situation at that company first, then you do the demo based on and just show, okay, here's the product, here's how it's going to solve your problems. Typically from there, if it's a larger enterprise deal, that company is going to want to see some kind of POC or some kind of paid pilot So in a sense, that is a product. It's like maybe not necessarily product led, but definitely product supported sale
Yeah.
because they're not ready to commit to 100K a year right out of the gate. They want to see a little bit of proof by using the product. And that's where sometimes the eyes actually get opened. They're like, holy crap, are you kidding me? Like, this is so easy. We had this at Blend with our first couple of implementations where, like, at the end of the day, we showed a report of all of the motion that happened with the sales reps using the workflow. And the VP was like, are you kidding me? Like, I can have this data at the end of every day. Like, yeah. He's like, this usually takes me weeks to accumulate, from all, he's like, this is incredible. Right. But even though we had been selling in a sense and showing the demos and talking about the value, it wasn't until we actually did that pilot that he saw like, holy crap, this is phenomenal. And he was even going into that pilot a little bit of a detractor. It was this person above him who was really pushing us. And he's like, all right, the CRO really wants me to do it. I'm going to do it. So it wasn't like he went in gung ho. Yeah, like I'm looking for reasons that this is going to work. He was actually looking for reasons for it not to work. But as soon as he saw it, because of the product, that's what got him over the line. Right.
And I think like whether you're selling or it's like you have this product of motion, that's the whole like linchpin of it all. It's like, hey, can we get you to that moment where like, oh my goodness, like this is like gonna make my life like way better. And it's like the sooner you get that is you're gonna build trust way faster. It's like it's at the end of the day, it's like we're selling something and like how do we get trust? It's like we can go on a lot of conversations, take people out for like, dinner and build trust in like traditional ways, or it's like we could also go through and just show them and be like, yeah, do you see it? Was that cool? Did you like it? And whether it's like in a demo format or it's in a product, it's all trying to get to the same goals. Like, how do we build trust as fast as possible?
Yeah, I sometimes I've had it described as like, what's the magic trick that you can perform to someone where you're just like, whoa, how'd you do that? Like, where'd it go? Like, where'd all that work go? Oh, it disappeared because here's the dashboard. It's automatically done for you. And that's what gets them engaged. It's not the entire value, but that sort of first value or that magic trick gets them to see what's possible. But again, if you're doing it from an enterprise like sales-led approach, you have a little bit more control of what they see and how they see it because you've unearthed through conversations and lots of discovery calls. Okay, this is exactly your problem. So I'm going to make sure that magic trick is the thing that I know you're interested in. Whereas pure PLG, you're relying on really understanding those different customer groups you're talking about, the ICP, and making sure that that experience is one that you don't have to guide. Well, I mean, you could guide it, of course, with the product, but not physically be there to guide them to see it.
Yeah, I think I like that magician example. The only thing I'd add on that, I think for a lot of sales-led companies, it's like some of the buyers are thinking about you in that context of like this magician. You're going to spin up, like show them whatever. You're like, that's cool, right? We would still look at a magician and say like, that's cool. How did you do that? But like when you're the magician and like you make something, you make actual magic happen, you're like, wow, I'm cool. And I think that's it. Like we're selling in B2B SaaS as like tools to enable anybody to do anything. It's amazing at the end of the day, but it's like our whole goal is to like make them look cool. Like when I first used Canva, I was like, I'm like terrible at design, but now I can design. I was like, this is cool. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. It's like moving from like the product being like, that's the cool thing. It's like, no, you're the one who's capable now.
The result is the cool thing, or it makes you look like the superstar in the organization because it frees up time to work on other things. Or now you have the data in one place that you can share with the SVP that you didn't have before. That makes you look good for sure. Well, look, man, I know we're kind of running up to the top of our time together. Any other specific tips or maybe like if you could tell somebody, hey, this is the one thing you absolutely want to make sure to avoid if you're going to take a PLG approach, or there's one thing you absolutely must do if you're even going to consider it, what would be that one piece of advice you give to someone?
My one-liner, your user success will ultimately be your success. So like if you get that like engage step, if you don't pay attention to it, the whole thing doesn't work. Like whenever you sign up for an app and it's like, I can't get to value. What do you typically do? It's like you just don't go back to that app. You want to install it from your phone. And it's like the whole model kind of is like, it just dies and withers if you don't actually engage your users. So that part can't be understated enough.
I love that. So the user success is your success. Yeah. Great advice. All right, Wes. Well, look, as we mentioned at the top of the conversation, you've written the book on product-led growth, how to sell or how to build a product that sells itself. Where's the best place for somebody to grab a copy? Because if I'm not mistaken, you actually can find a free copy on your website, correct?
Yes. Part of our product-led motion.
I love it. We do the same with our book.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. ProductLedBook.com.
ProductLedBook.com. It's probably good for SEO.
Probably.
ProductLedGrowth.com. So they can just click a button, request a free copy, and then you'll just email it out to them, I guess, or they can download it. Awesome.
Yep, for sure.
Well, I bought a copy of the book when it first came out. I actually read it. I remember reading it on an airplane because I had some dedicated time, and I was going through it as to see okay, how can I pull Wes's arguments apart? How could I decide he's wrong about PLG and I'm right about doing sales led? And obviously there's a good place for PLG if you're applying it the right way. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be an either or, it could be a cohesive strategy.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think the single biggest thing that I take away from this conversation is know your ICP, know your users. What are they trying to accomplish? Make sure you're focusing, because if it's just about, even though it's called product-led growth, it's really not about the product. Yeah. It's really about the user. And if the product doesn't help the user get their outcomes, it doesn't matter. So
totally. Well said.
All right, man. So good to finally have you on the show. I'd love to do a part 2. I think you mentioned before we got online, you're working on the second book or second edition of this book. Got it. Okay. When can we expect to see that hit the press? Is that a little ways out? Not to put pressure on you. I'm just curious.
No. I'm hoping September this year.
Oh, okay.
September 2023.
September 2023. Okay. Well, now you have some public accountability to that.
Yeah. There we go. Positive peer pressure.
Positive peer pressure. Exactly. Well, listen, Wes, thanks again for making the time to join us today and share your expertise. And we'll make sure to share this episode with you so you can share it with your tribe, and make sure that everybody has a link to that book in the show notes as well. So awesome. Thanks for joining. And we'll definitely have to do this again really soon.
Yeah, no, this was fun. Thanks so much.
All right. See ya. And that's a wrap. Well, Wes kind of asked me afterwards, why don't we argue a little bit more? He was looking for a little bit more push from me and a little bit more of an argument. But candidly, as he talks about PLG, and this is why I wanted to have him on the episode, he just is such an expert when it comes to PLG. And there's so many logical reasons as to when and where and how PLG can work. He made some of my arguments, a little bit difficult to make. And in other ways, he acquiesced and understood that there's certainly a place where sales-led can be and should be the right approach. So just really glad to have had him on the show. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share the episode with a friend or 10. Click the share button, send them an email, send them a text, and let them know that this episode is up and that they might want to give it a listen. We'd also love it if you would leave a review, give us a like, make sure that you download or subscribe to our podcast so that every time a new one comes up, you can pop it onto your phone and listen to it while you're out shopping, driving, doing all the things you might be doing every single day. So again, thanks for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. And until next time, go out and good luck. Talk soon.